The vast emptiness of space was silent, yet it held secrets and dangers that few could imagine. On the edge of the galaxy, in a small human colony known as Novaterra, life was simple. Farmers tilled the land, miners worked the rich asteroid belts, and families thrived under the warm glow of a distant sun. For decades, this colony had been a symbol of humanity's ability to expand into the unknown. But peace was always fragile, and Novaterra was about to face a threat it could never have prepared for. Above the planet, the night sky shimmered with stars. But tonight, something new appeared. At first, it was just a distant glimmer, faint and unthreatening. Then, it grew larger, brighter, until it became clear. It was not a star, but a fleet of ships. The Exirath Dominion had arrived. The Exirath were a race feared across the galaxy. Their empire had crushed countless worlds, enslaving species and wiping out those who resisted. They valued dominance above all and believed in the survival of the strongest. For them, humanity was nothing more than an insignificant insect waiting to be crushed. Inside the command ship of the fleet, High Commander Zultrax stared at the image of Novaterra on his holo display. His dark, scaly skin glistened under the dim light, and his yellow eyes narrowed with disdain. "A backwater human colony," he sneered. "They won't even put up a fight. Begin the assault." The Exirath fleet descended like a storm. The first wave of ships broke through the planet's atmosphere, their engines roaring like thunder. The people of Novaterra were caught completely off guard. Alarms blared, but they had no military force, no planetary defenses strong enough to face an invasion of this scale. In the colony's main square, a young engineer named Ethan Carter stared at the sky in horror. He had heard stories of alien empires, of galactic wars, but those had always felt distant, something that happened to other species in other parts of the galaxy. Now it was real, and it was here. "They're attacking us," Ethan whispered, his voice shaking. "We're not ready for this." Beside him, Dr. Sarah Lynn, the colony's chief scientist, clenched her fists. "We might not have warships or armies, but we're not going down without a fight. If they want to take this colony, they'll have to bleed for it." Sarah's words spread like wildfire among the colonists. People began to mobilize, not as soldiers but as survivors. They had no formal training, no advanced weapons, but they had their minds, their courage, and their determination. Ethan quickly gathered a small team of engineers. "We can use the mining drones," he said. "They're not weapons, but they're strong enough to cut through steel. If we reprogram them, we can turn them into defenses." Meanwhile, Sarah coordinated the colony's communications. "We need to send a distress signal to Earth," she said. "If there's any chance of reinforcements, we have to take it." As the Exirath ships descended, the colonists scrambled to prepare. Mining lasers were mounted on rooftops, cargo loaders were modified into crude battle mechs, and barricades were built from whatever materials they could find. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Above them, the Exirath ships began their bombardment. Explosions rocked the colony as buildings crumbled under the assault. Fires spread through the streets, and the air was thick with smoke and chaos. Yet, despite the destruction, the colonists held their ground. Ethan and his team launched their modified drones, which swarmed the Exirath ground troops like angry hornets. The drones cut through the invaders' armor, forcing the Exirath to retreat temporarily. It wasn't a victory, but it was enough to buy the colonists some time. Inside the command ship, Zultrax watched the resistance with growing annoyance. "Pathetic insects," he growled. "They think they can defy us. Increase the pressure. Wipe them out." The Exirath forces doubled their efforts, and the situation grew more desperate. The colonists were brave, but bravery alone could not stop the overwhelming firepower of the Exirath. People began to lose hope as the invaders pushed closer to the heart of the colony. But then, something unexpected happened. The distress signal Sarah had sent reached its destination. On Earth, in the United Federation Command, the message was received and broadcast to every corner of the human military network. The message was simple: Novaterra under attack. No chance of survival. We need help. For years, humanity had avoided direct conflict with alien empires, knowing they were outmatched in technology and numbers. But this time was different. Novaterra was a human colony, and humanity would not abandon its own. Back on Novaterra, as the Xirath forces prepared for their final assault, Ethan looked up at the sky. For a moment, he thought he saw something, a flash of light, a shadow moving among the stars. Is that? He began, his voice filled with disbelief. Sarah stepped beside him, her eyes widening. Reinforcements. In the distance, the first wave of Earth's fleet emerged from hyperspace. The ships were smaller and less advanced than the Xirath vessels, but they were fast, agile, and crewed by humans who had no intention of losing. As the human fleet engaged the Xirath, the battle for Novaterra entered a new phase. The colonists watched in awe as their people fought back, turning the tide of what seemed like a hopeless war. For the first time, the Xirath Dominion realized that humanity was not just another weak species to conquer. They had awakened something far more dangerous, humanity's wrath. And this was only the beginning. The skies above Novaterra were ablaze with chaos. Streams of laser fire crisscrossed the atmosphere as Earth's fleet clashed with the Xirath invaders. The human ships were smaller, sleeker, and significantly less advanced than the alien warships, but they had one advantage: sheer determination. Inside the lead ship, the EFS Valiant, Admiral Marcus Kane stood at the command deck, his steely eyes fixed on the battlefield. "Focus all firepower on their forward fleet," he commanded. "We need to break their formation and protect the colony at all costs." The Valiant shuddered as enemy fire slammed into its shields. The crew worked frantically at their stations, sweat dripping down their faces as alarms blared. Yet, no one faltered. They knew what was at stake, not just Novaterra, but humanity's pride, its survival, and its place in the galaxy. Back on the ground, Ethan Carter and Dr. Sarah Lynn watched the battle unfold. The sight of Earth's fleet engaging the Xirath sparked hope among the colonists. Cheers erupted in the streets, even as the sounds of explosions echoed in the distance. "They came," Ethan whispered, almost in disbelief. Sarah nodded, her expression a mix of relief and determination. "They came, but this fight isn't over. If the Xirath break through, we're still finished." With that grim reminder, the colonists returned to their makeshift defenses. Mining drones patrolled the streets, armed with crude weaponry, while barricades were reinforced. Everyone played a role. Engineers, farmers, teachers, all united against a common enemy. In orbit, humanity's resolve. The Xirath fleet's commander, Zeltrax, watched the battle from his command ship with growing frustration. "These humans are more persistent than I expected," he snarled. "But persistence won't save them." He turned to his weapons officer. "Deploy the disruptor cannons. Target their lead ship. Let's show them the power of the Xirath Dominion." Massive energy cannons on the Xirath warships hummed to life, releasing beams of devastating power. The Valiant's shields flared as the first beam struck, causing the ship to lurch violently. "Shields are at 40%, a crewman shouted. Admiral Kane clenched his fists. "Divert all power to the forward shields, and someone get me a targeting solution on those disruptors." The Valiant returned fire, launching a barrage of missiles and plasma rounds. Several smaller Xirath ships were hit, exploding into fiery debris, but the disruptor cannons continued their assault. A desperate plan. On Novaterra, Sarah and Ethan worked together to find a way to support the fleet. The colony's power grid had been damaged during the initial assault, leaving most of their systems offline. "If we can get the orbital defense array online, we could give the fleet some cover," Sarah said, her voice urgent. Ethan frowned. "The array hasn't been used in years. It's practically falling apart." "Then we fix it," Sarah replied firmly. "It's our only chance." The two of them, along with a small team of engineers, raced to the colony's control center. The defense array was an ancient piece of technology, a relic from humanity's early days in space exploration. It wasn't designed to take on a fleet like the HFY, but it was better than nothing. As they worked to repair the array, the ground shook from nearby explosions. The HFY had sent ground troops to finish the job, and they were closing in fast. "We don't have much time," Ethan said, sweat pouring down his face as he reconnected a series of power cables. Sarah glanced at the radar. "They're almost here. Just a little longer." The array awakens. The HFY ground forces broke through the colony's outer defenses, their towering mechs and soldiers advancing with terrifying precision. The colonists fought back bravely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. At the last moment, a loud hum filled the air, followed by a blinding burst of light. The defense array had come online. High above the planet, beams of energy shot from the array, striking several HFY ships. The sudden assault disrupted their formation, giving Earth's fleet the opening they needed. On board the Valiant, Admiral Kane saw the opportunity and seized it. "All ships, target their flank. Push them back." The human fleet surged forward, unleashing a devastating counterattack. HFY ships began to fall one by one, their once imposing formation now in disarray. A new kind of enemy. As the tide of battle shifted, Commander Zeltrax's frustration turned to fury. "This is unacceptable," he roared. "They're just humans. They shouldn't be capable of this." He turned to his second-in-command. "Deploy the Vanguard. If they want to fight, we'll show them what true power looks like." The Vanguard was the HFY's elite strike force, equipped with advanced weaponry and heavily armored ships. As they entered the battlefield, the balance began to shift once more. The Valiant took a direct hit from one of the Vanguard ships, causing massive damage to its hull. Fires erupted on the bridge, and crew members scrambled to contain the chaos. "Admiral, we've lost half our weapon systems," a lieutenant reported. Kane gritted his teeth. "We're not done yet. Prepare for a collision course. If we're going down, we're taking them with us." The battlefield above Novaterra grew quieter for a moment, a strange calm in the middle of the storm. All eyes, both human and Tyrath, turned toward the edge of the system where an enormous fleet emerged from hyperspace. The ships were sleek and gleaming, their hulls lined with golden insignias that glimmered under the light of the nearby sun. They weren't Earth's standard fleet design, nor did they resemble anything in the HFY arsenal. These ships were faster, larger, and seemed to pulse with energy. Admiral Marcus Kane, aboard the battered EF's Valiant, stared at the holographic display in disbelief. Who are they?" he asked aloud, his voice filled with a mix of hope and confusion. A voice crackled through the comms, deep and commanding. "This is Commander Rallick of the Orion Pact. Humanity, we have answered your call for aid." The Orion Pact. The Orion Pact was a name whispered in galactic legends, but rarely spoken of openly. They were an enigmatic coalition of ancient species, powerful and reclusive. For centuries, they had stayed out of galactic conflicts, watching as empires rose and fell. But their motives were always shrouded in mystery. Back on the surface of Novaterra, Ethan and Dr. Sarah Lynn were equally stunned as the news spread. "The Orion Pact," Ethan repeated. "I thought they were just a myth. Why would they help us?" Sarah frowned, her mind racing. "Whatever their reasons, we need them. If anyone can match the HFY's power, it's the Orion Pact." But even as hope began to grow, there was a lingering question. Why had the Pact decided to intervene now, after humanity had fought alone for so long? The Vanguard versus the Pact. On board the HFY flagship, High Commander Zeltrax's rage was barely contained. He slammed his clawed hand against the control panel, shattering the screen. "The Orion Pact dares to interfere. They think their ancient fleet will save the humans." He turned to his officers. "Prepare the Vanguard for full deployment. No mercy. We'll crush them all." The Vanguard ships, already dominating the battlefield, formed up into an impenetrable wall of destruction. They advanced toward the Orion fleet, firing an onslaught of disruptor beams and plasma torpedoes. But the Orion Pact was prepared. Their ships, larger and faster, darted through the Xirath formation with precision. Beams of blue energy erupted from their vessels, slicing through Vanguard ships like paper. The once feared Vanguard, the pride of the Xirath Dominion, began to falter. On the Valiant, Admiral Kane watched in awe. "They're dismantling the Vanguard," he said, his voice almost a whisper. But he knew this was no time for complacency. "All ships, coordinate with the Orion fleet. Focus fire on the Vanguard's core formation. Let's make this count." The ground battle intensifies. While the skies above turned into a spectacle of destruction, the battle on Novaterra's surface raged on. The Xirath ground forces, relentless and merciless, pressed deeper into the colony. The colonists fought back with everything they had, but they were being overwhelmed. Ethan and Sarah, working with a group of engineers and civilians, had fortified the colony's command center. Using the newly reactivated defense array, they targeted Xirath walkers and troop carriers. But it wasn't enough. "We're running out of power," one engineer shouted. "The array's energy cells can't keep up." Ethan slammed his fist against the console. "We need more time. If the fleet wins up there, we have a chance." Just then, the ground shook violently as a Xirath mech burst through the outer barricade. The towering machine loomed over the colonists, its cannons charging. Sarah grabbed a handheld comm device. "All remaining units, converge on the command center. We need backup now." The turning point. As the mech prepared to fire, a blinding streak of energy slammed into it from above, obliterating it in an instant. The colonists looked up to see Orion dropships descending from the skies. The Orion ground troops, clad in shimmering armor and wielding weapons that glowed with otherworldly energy, joined the fight. They moved with precision and grace, cutting through the Xirath forces like a knife through butter. Ethan and Sarah watched in awe as the tide began to turn. "They're incredible," Ethan said, his voice filled with relief. Sarah nodded, but her expression was still tense. "We're not out of this yet. The Xirath don't give up easily." The Xirath's final gambit. In orbit, the Xirath flagship prepared its most devastating weapon, a planet-killer cannon capable of obliterating entire colonies in a single shot. High Commander Zeltrax sneered as he gave the order. "If we can't have Novaterra, no one will." On board the Valiant, the warning came too late. "Admiral, the Xirath flagship is charging its main cannon." Kane's heart sank. The human fleet was too damaged to launch a full-scale assault on the flagship, and the Orion Pact was too far engaged with the Vanguard to intervene. But then, a single Orion ship broke off from the formation. It was larger than the rest, its hull adorned with intricate markings that seemed to glow with ancient energy. On board the Orion flagship, Commander Raylick issued a single command: "Activate the luminal core." Cliffhanger ending. As the Xirath cannon prepared to fire, the Orion flagship unleashed a burst of energy unlike anything seen before. The light engulfed the battlefield, cutting through space with devastating precision. The screen on the Valiant went white, and for a moment, everyone thought it was over. When the light faded, the Xirath flagship was crippled, its cannon destroyed. But the cost of the Orion attack was steep. Their flagship was now adrift, its power core destabilized. Admiral Kane's voice broke the silence. "They saved us, but at what cost?" The battlefield over Novaterra was filled with the wreckage of ships and the faint glow of dying embers in space. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was an eerie silence. Both sides, humanity, the Orion Pact, and the Xirath, paused, assessing their losses. On the Valiant, Admiral Marcus Kane leaned forward in his command chair, watching the faintly flickering hologram of the Orion Commander Relic. The once confident alien commander now looked strained, his face shadowed with exhaustion. "The Xirath flagship is crippled," Raylick reported. "But I sense, this isn't the end." Kane furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" Raylick's eyes narrowed, his voice taking on a grave tone. "The Xirath never deploy their entire fleet unless there's something bigger at stake. Their flagship's destruction might trigger something worse. The Xirath's mysterious artifact." Meanwhile, on the surface of Novaterra, Ethan and Dr. Sarah Lynn were among the colonists clearing debris and treating the wounded after the Orion reinforcements had pushed back the Xirath forces. However, the mood was far from celebratory. Orion ground troops had uncovered a strange device in the Xirath's main command post, a shimmering black obelisk covered in alien symbols. Its ominous glow pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. "What is that?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with unease. Commander Verl, the Orion officer leading the ground forces, examined it with suspicion. "It's a Xirath resonance beacon," he explained. "They plant these devices on planets they intend to harvest." Sarah's eyes widened in alarm. "Harvest? What do you mean?" Viral hesitated, his expression grim. "The Xirath don't just conquer planets. They drain them, life energy, resources, even the very atmosphere, leaving nothing behind. This beacon is likely summoning something far worse than their fleet." The beacon activates. Before anyone could react, the obelisk began to vibrate, and its glow intensified. A low hum resonated across the battlefield, growing louder with each passing second. The ground beneath them trembled, cracks forming in the earth. Sarah scrambled to her equipment, scanning the obelisk. "It's emitting an energy wave. If we don't shut it down, it could destabilize the entire colony." Ethan grabbed a rifle and turned to Viral. "What's the plan? Can we destroy it?" Viral shook his head. "No. These devices are designed to be indestructible. The only way to stop it is to deactivate it from within. But that would require knowledge of its internal mechanisms, and only the Xirath would know that." A desperate mission. As the beacon's energy pulse spread, chaos erupted across the colony. Electronics failed, and the skies above Novaterra darkened unnaturally. Civilians screamed as strange. Shadow-like figures began to emerge from the cracks in the ground. "These aren't just soldiers," Viral said, his voice laced with fear. "They're phantoms. The Xirath used them to weaken a planet before total annihilation." Ethan looked at Sarah and the Orion commander. "We can't wait for the fleet to save us. We need to stop this now." Sarah nodded, though fear was etched on her face. "If we can get inside the beacon, I might be able to figure out how it works, or at least disable it temporarily." The journey into the beacon. The group, consisting of Ethan, Sarah, Commander Viral, and a small team of Orion soldiers, approached the beacon. Its towering form seemed to pulse with malevolence, and the air around it felt heavy, as if reality itself were bending. As they stepped closer, the shadow-like phantoms grew more aggressive. The Orion soldiers used energy-based weapons to hold them back, their beams slicing through the creatures. But for every phantom destroyed, 2 more appeared. Ethan fired his rifle, covering Sarah as she worked to unlock an access panel on the side of the beacon. "Hurry, Sarah," he shouted as a phantom lunged at him, its claw narrowly missing his face. "I'm trying," she snapped, her hands trembling as she worked. "This technology is unlike anything I've ever seen." Finally, the panel slid open, revealing a glowing core within. The team stepped inside, leaving the chaos of the battlefield behind. Inside the beacon. The interior of the beacon was a labyrinth of pulsing energy conduits and alien machinery. The walls seemed alive, shifting and glowing with an otherworldly light. Sarah immediately began scanning the core, her equipment whirring as she analyzed the readings. This is beyond anything I've ever encountered," she muttered. "It's not just a machine. It's alive." Ethan and Viral stood guard, their weapons at the ready. Whatever it is, we need to shut it down before it tears this planet apart, Ethan said. Sarah frowned, her hands moving rapidly across the controls. There's a central node deeper inside. If we can overload it, it might destabilize the entire system, but we'll only have minutes to escape before it explodes. A race against time. The team pushed deeper into the beacon, battling waves of automated defenses and shadowy phantoms that seemed to materialize from the walls. Every step was a struggle, the air growing hotter and heavier as they approached the core. Finally, they'd reached the central node, a massive, glowing sphere suspended in the air by beams of energy. Sarah quickly set to work, her hands flying over the alien controls. I can overload it, but it'll take time. Ethan and Viral held the line, firing at the seemingly endless waves of phantoms. You've got 2 minutes, tops, Ethan shouted. As the countdown neared its end, the core began to crackle with unstable energy. Alarms blared, and the entire structure shook violently. It's done, Sarah yelled. Run. Cliffhanger ending. The team sprinted toward the exit as the beacon's core began to collapse. The phantoms grew more frenzied, their attacks more desperate, but the team fought their way through. As they burst out of the beacon, the structure imploded behind them, releasing a shockwave that knocked them to the ground. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the phantoms vanished, and the skies began to clear. Ethan looked at Sarah, his face pale but determined. Did we stop it? Sarah hesitated, her expression grim. We bought time. But this isn't over. That beacon was just the beginning. The HFY have something far worse planned. The debris of the destroyed beacon still smoldered, and the air above Novatera felt heavy with tension. Ethan, Sarah, Commander Viral, and their surviving team stood among the ruins, their faces grim as the aftermath of the battle settled over them. The colony had survived, but at what cost? It wasn't over. The beacon's final message. Sarah knelt beside the wreckage of the beacon, her scanner buzzing faintly. The device's explosion had scattered shards of its blackened surface across the area, some of them still glowing faintly with energy. She picked up a fragment carefully, her brow furrowed. Something's wrong, she said, her voice low. What do you mean? Ethan asked, standing beside her. This fragment. Sarah held it up, her scanner glowing green. It's still transmitting a signal. The beacon might be destroyed, but it sent out a final pulse before it exploded. Coordinates. Commander Viral stepped closer, his expression dark. Coordinates. To what? Sarah tapped on her device, the display showing a map of the galaxy. Bright red dots began to appear, each one marking a location across the Orion sector and beyond. As the team watched, more dots began to spread, forming a web of terror. It's a network, Sarah said, her voice shaking. There are dozens of these beacons, maybe hundreds, already deployed across the galaxy. A grim realization. Ethan stared at the map, his fists clenching. You're saying this wasn't the only one. This was just... What? A test. Sarah nodded reluctantly. If the HFY activate all of these at once, the energy they'll unleash could destroy entire star systems. They aren't just targeting colonies anymore. They're targeting the galaxy itself. Viral's voice was calm but firm. We need to take this to the Orion Council. If they understand the scale of this threat, they'll mobilize every fleet. We have to stop it. Ethan turned to him, his jaw tight. And how long will that take? We barely survived one beacon. How do we fight hundreds? Viral's silence was answer enough. A message from the enemy. Before anyone could respond, a crackling sound echoed from Sarah's scanner. It was faint at first, but then it grew louder, forming into a chillingly familiar voice. It was HFY. The guttural tones of the alien language sent a shiver down the team's spines, but the message was clear, translated by the scanner's eye. Your defiance is meaningless. The galaxy belongs to the HFY. You delay the inevitable, but soon, All will kneel before the harvest. The voice cut out, leaving an ominous silence in its wake. The Council's reluctance. Back aboard the Valiant, Admiral Marcus Kane stood before the holographic projection of the Orion Council chamber. The alien representatives of the allied races looked uneasy as Kane and Viral presented their findings. "This map changes everything," Viral said, his tone urgent. "That Xyrath are no longer waging war to conquer. They're preparing to annihilate the galaxy." One of the council members, a tall, feathered alien from the Zarnak species, shook his head. "We've already committed most of our fleets to defending the core systems. Diverting them now would leave us vulnerable to direct attack." "And what happens when the beacons activate?" Kane asked, his voice sharp. "You're worried about defending systems that might not even exist if the Xyrath succeed." Another counselor, an insectoid being, clicked its mandibles. "Do we even have the means to disable these beacons? One nearly destroyed an entire colony. Hundreds. It seems impossible." Viral glanced at Kane. "We have humanity on our side now. Their strategies are unlike anything the Xyrath have encountered. If we can work together, we might have a chance." Kane stepped forward. "Give us the resources and the time. We'll find a way to stop them." A dangerous plan. After hours of heated debate, the Council reluctantly agreed to provide limited support. Humanity would take the lead in locating and disabling the beacons, with assistance from Orion strike teams. But the task ahead seemed insurmountable. In the war room aboard the Valiant, Kane, Ethan, Sarah, and Viral pored over the map. Each red dot represented a beacon, and each beacon represented a potential apocalypse. Ethan tapped one of the dots on the map. "This one is the closest. If we hit it fast and hard, we might learn how to disable the others." Sarah frowned. "But we can't keep doing this one at a time. We need a way to disrupt the entire network." Viral crossed his arms. "If we could infiltrate a Xyrath command ship, we might be able to access their central control system. It's a long shot, but it could give us the information we need." Kane nodded. "Then that's our plan. We'll take out this beacon first and use what we learned to go after their command network." Preparing for the next battle. As the team prepared for their next mission, the weight of the galaxy's fate hung heavy over them. The Xyrath were more than a formidable enemy. They were a force of nature, relentless and unyielding. Ethan stood in the armory, checking his weapons as Sarah approached. "You okay?" she asked. He sighed. "Honestly, no. But what choice do we have? If we don't stop them, who will?" Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "We've made it this far. We'll figure it out. We have to." Ethan nodded, steeling himself. "Let's make them regret ever underestimating us." Cliffhanger ending. As the Valiant set course for the next beacon, a transmission from deep space interrupted their preparations. The message was garbled, but one phrase came through clearly. "They're coming. The Xyrath fleet is moving, straight for Earth." Everyone froze, the realization hitting them like a thunderbolt. The Xyrath weren't waiting for the beacons to activate. They were making their move. Would humanity survive the storm that was about to descend upon them? The bridge of the Valiant was a flurry of activity as the transmission echoed through the speakers. Commander Viral's sharp eyes scanned the data feed, his jaw tightening with every passing second. The Xyrath fleet was on the move, heading straight for Earth. Admiral Kane slammed his fist on the console. "We don't have the time or the firepower to stop them. If they reach Earth..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Ethan and Sarah stood nearby, their faces pale. The stakes had never been higher. A new problem emerges. "Admiral," one of the bridge officers called out, "we're picking up another signal, coming from the same sector as the next beacon." "What kind of signal?" Viral asked. "It's a distress call. It's faint, but it's definitely human." The room fell silent. A human ship, possibly stranded or captured, was near the second beacon. If they could rescue the survivors, they might gain valuable intel on the Xyrath's operations, or risk everything by splitting their forces. Sarah spoke up. We can't ignore it. If there are survivors, they could help us understand how the HFY are controlling the beacons. Ethan frowned. And what if it's a trap? The HFY could be luring us into a kill zone. Kane considered this for a moment before turning to Viral. What's your call, Commander? Viral's response was immediate. We have to investigate. If it's a trap, we'll deal with it. But if there are people out there, we can't leave them to die. The split decision. The team devised a daring plan. The Valiant would head toward the distress signal while a smaller strike team, led by Viral and Ethan, infiltrated the beacon site. Time was of the essence, and splitting their forces was a gamble they couldn't afford to lose. Kane's voice was steady as he addressed the crew. We've faced impossible odds before. We'll face them again. But this time, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for Earth and every life in the galaxy. The crew erupted into action, preparing for the dual mission. Ethan checked his weapons, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Sarah approached him, her expression serious. You ready for this? She asked. Ready as I'll ever be, Ethan replied. What about you? Sarah gave a small, determined smile. We've come this far. We're not backing down now. The beacon site, a grim discovery. The strike team's dropship landed in the shadow of a massive asteroid, its surface riddled with HFY structures. The beacon loomed ahead, its dark spires crackling with energy. Ethan, Viral, and a small group of soldiers moved cautiously through the twisted terrain, their weapons at the ready. The air was thick with tension, every shadow a potential ambush. As they approached the beacon, Sarah's voice came through their comms. Be careful. I'm picking up unusual energy readings. It's like the beacon is evolving. Evolving, Ethan repeated. What does that mean? It means it's doing something we don't understand, Sarah replied. Just be ready for anything. The team reached the base of the beacon and found something unexpected. A small human shuttle, partially destroyed but clearly of Earth origin. What's a human ship doing here? Viral muttered. Ethan approached cautiously, his weapon raised. As he reached the shuttle, the door creaked open, and a figure stumbled out, a ragged, injured man wearing the insignia of an Earth exploration crew. They're everywhere, the man gasped, collapsing into Ethan's arms. Who? Ethan demanded. The HFY. The man shook his head weakly. Worse. Much worse. The HFY's new weapon. Before they could press him further, the ground beneath them began to shake. The beacon's spires lit up with a blinding light, and the air filled with a deafening hum. Viral shouted, Fall back. It's activating. The team scrambled for cover as the beacon unleashed a pulse of energy that rippled across the asteroid. The injured man clung to Ethan, his voice trembling. They're harvesting, he whispered. The beacons aren't just weapons. They're alive. They're feeding. Ethan's blood ran cold. Feeding on what? The man's eyes widened with fear. On us. A race against time. Back on the Valiant, Sarah monitored the situation from the bridge, her hands flying over the controls as she analyzed the data streaming in from the beacon. Admiral, we have a problem, she said, her voice urgent. The beacon is drawing energy from its surroundings and from any living organisms nearby. If it fully activates, it could wipe out everything within this sector. Kane's face was grim. How do we stop it? I don't know yet, Sarah admitted. But we need to destroy it before it completes whatever it's doing. The trap is sprung. As the strike team prepared to plant charges on the beacon, the HFY revealed their hand. Dozens of alien soldiers emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on the humans. Ethan and Viral exchanged a look, their expressions hardening. This was a trap, Ethan said. Looks like it, Viral replied. But they underestimated us. The humans opened fire, their advanced tactics and sheer determination catching the HFY off guard. Despite being outnumbered, They fought with a ferocity that shook even the relentless aliens. Cliffhanger ending. Just as the tide of battle began to turn in their favor, the beacon emitted another pulse of energy, knocking everyone to the ground. The injured man screamed as the light engulfed him, his body disintegrating before their eyes. Ethan stared in horror as the beacon's energy grew stronger, its spires glowing like molten lava. "Sarah," he shouted into his comm, "we're out of time. Can we destroy this thing or not?" Sarah's voice crackled back, filled with desperation. "Ethan, get out of there. If you're too close when it goes, you'll..." The comm went silent as the beacon's energy reached its peak, and the screen cut to black. The Valiant drifted silently above the asteroid field, its weapons primed and shields glowing faintly in the darkness. On the surface below, chaos erupted as the strike team fought desperately to disable the HFY beacon. But as the beacon's energy continued to surge, the humans knew they were running out of time. The clock ticks down. "Ethan, we've got to move," Viral shouted, firing at the approaching HFY soldiers. The aliens advanced in waves, their movements synchronized, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. Ethan ducked behind a rock, his comm crackling. "Sarah, we need an answer. How do we shut this thing down?" "I'm working on it." Sarah's voice was strained, filled with the pressure of the moment. "The beacon is drawing power from the surrounding asteroids. If we overload its core, it'll destroy itself, but you'll have to get closer to plant the charge manually." Ethan looked at the glowing beacon, its spires reaching into the sky like claws. The energy radiating from it was almost blinding, and the air around it shimmered with heat. "Closer," he muttered. "Great, because this wasn't dangerous enough already." The final push. Viral gestured to the rest of the strike team. "We'll hold off the HFY. You and Sarah figure out how to blow this thing to pieces." Ethan hesitated for a moment, glancing at the soldiers who had fought so bravely alongside him. "Viral, don't argue," Viral cut him off. "You're the only one who can do this. Now go." Ethan nodded, determination hardening his features. "Stay alive. That's an order." Viral smirked. "Yes, sir." Ethan sprinted toward the beacon, dodging laser fire and explosions. His heart pounded as he reached the base of the structure, where the air was thick with an unnatural hum. A desperate plan. Back on the Valiant, Sarah stared at the data on her screen. "Admiral, if we don't destroy the beacon in the next 3 minutes, the energy pulse will expand to catastrophic levels. It'll wipe out everything within light years." Admiral Kane's expression was grim. "And Ethan?" Sarah hesitated. "If he's still on the surface when it goes, he won't survive." The bridge fell silent. Kane's jaw tightened, but he didn't waver. He knew the risks. Focus on the mission. Sarah clenched her fists but didn't argue. Instead, she opened a channel to Ethan. "You've got 2 minutes to plant the charge and get out of there. After that, there's nothing we can do." Ethan's voice came back, calm despite the chaos around him. "Understood." A fight to the finish. As Ethan climbed the beacon, he could feel the raw energy coursing through the structure. The heat was intense, and the vibrations made every step treacherous. He reached the core, a swirling mass of light and energy that seemed alive. "This is it," he muttered, pulling the explosive charge from his pack. Behind him, the HFY forces were relentless. Viral and the strike team fought valiantly, but the aliens' numbers were overwhelming. "We can't hold them much longer." Viral shouted into his comm. "Ethan, whatever you're doing, do it faster." Ethan planted the charge, his hands moving with practiced precision. He set the timer and took a deep breath. "Charge is armed," he said into his comm. "I'm on my way out." The ultimate sacrifice. As Ethan began his descent, the beacon emitted a deafening roar. The energy surged, and the air around him crackled with electricity. On the Valiant, Sarah's voice was frantic. "Ethan, the beacon's destabilizing. You don't have time. Get out of there now." "I'm trying." Ethan snapped, leaping from the structure just as the Xirath forces closed in. But then he saw it, a Xirath warrior standing near the base of the beacon, aiming a weapon at the explosive charge. If they destroyed it prematurely, the beacon wouldn't go down. It would amplify the energy pulse and destroy everything. Ethan didn't hesitate. He turned back, firing at the alien with pinpoint accuracy. The Xirath fell, but not before landing a shot of its own. Ethan stumbled, pain lancing through his side. He looked up at the beacon, its energy building to a blinding crescendo. "Sarah," he said into his comm, his voice steady despite the pain. "Tell my family I—" The transmission cut off. The beacon's end. From the Valiant, the crew watched in silence as the beacon erupted in a massive explosion, the light so intense it seemed to split the darkness of space. The shockwave rippled outward, disintegrating the remaining Xirath forces and leaving the asteroid field in ruins. Sarah stared at the screen, her heart sinking. "Ethan," she whispered. Admiral Kane placed a hand on her shoulder. He knew what he was fighting for. And because of him, Earth has a chance. A new hope. The victory was bittersweet. The Xirath's beacon network was crippled, and their forces scattered. But the cost had been great. As the Valiant and the surviving ships prepared to return to Earth, Sarah stood on the bridge, staring out at the stars. "Ethan once said humanity's greatest strength was our ability to adapt," she said softly. "He proved that today." Kane nodded. "The war isn't over, but today we reminded the galaxy who we are." The camera panned out, showing the Valiant moving through the wreckage of the battle. The voiceover concluded. In the face of impossible odds, humanity's wrath became its salvation. And while the cost was high, the message was clear. No force in the galaxy can stand against the unyielding spirit of Earth.